thought I would talk about the issue of being different or being the victim of racism in Western society. Now, I'm not really into all of the woke stuff, all of the victim culture where people want to kind of jump to the default conclusion that the reason why something isn't working out in their life the way they want is because the cards are stacked against them. And therefore, it's because everyone else is a racist or a bigot or something else in that general neighborhood. I don't believe that. I think it's important to realize that there are people who are successful and people who are happy in all walks of life, in all different climes and places. And so you really can't be an unhappy, miserable, unsuccessful person and then blame some external thing beyond your control as the reason why. And I also think it's important to talk about how the type of racism which happens usually in Western societies is absolutely not comparable to the type of racism that happened back when racism was actually an official part of life, right? It's like the difference between you saying, well, I don't think that I'm quite treated the same as everyone else because I'm a minority, or being put into a society where you have to use your own separate drinking fountains because you aren't allowed to, mix with other people, or you aren't able to go to school with other people because the system is actually rigged and structured in a way that excludes you from key parts of life. You can't compare systemic racism like what probably existed in, 1850s in the United States, and the perception of racism just because you're a free person pretty much just like everybody else. It's just maybe sometimes you feel like you're marginalized in a social setting or something like that. There's also things which we kind of don't maybe talk about enough when things like sexism or racism come into play. Like, for example, I was reading about how in the southern United States, the life expectancy is lower. And I don't know why that is, but you could say it's a racial thing. But the probability is it's not really a racial thing. It's a cultural thing, because people in that geography tend to do things which are less healthy. Like maybe their diet is more fried foods, or maybe it's a matter of education. If people are not educated very well, then maybe they make poorer health decisions or something like that. But if you were going to just try to say, well, the life expectancy is lower in places where there's more minorities or something like that because of racism, well, it's not that simple. Or you could look at male and female roles and you could say, well, women make less money than men, and therefore it's sexism. And that certainly could be the case in some cases. But in many cases, that's not really what's happening. What's actually happening is that while women can do pretty much anything a man can do, the typical woman potentially isn't going to want the same jobs as men will, right? So like there's going to be some women who love the idea of working in construction, but there's also going to be a lot of women who don't want to do that, whereas there's going to be a lot of guys who do want that job. And so if you have a job where more men are likely to want the job than women, and that job happens to pay better, then you have the situation where you have the perception of unfairness when really it's just that demographic has a different focus. for example, in management, I would say probably you tend to see fewer women in leadership roles. And some of that is maybe a passive sexism. It's possible that that's the case, but there are women who are in leadership roles. It's just not as many of them. So if you look and you see, well, amongst senior management, it's like two women and 8 guys, say. Well, is that just sexism, or is it also partially that maybe those are roles which tend to attract men more, whereas women tend to be a little bit more maternal, or they tend to be more sentimental, or they're less interested in maybe jobs that are usually dominated by very egocentric, aggressive sorts of people. Doesn't mean that there aren't women who will do very well there. It's just overall you tend to have more women in roles that are more sensitive or empathy driven, and you have more men in roles that are probably a little more ego driven, a little bit more about aggression or competition or something like that, right? So different people are different. Like, that's the bottom line. So sometimes things get blamed on sexism or racism or prejudice, which really are just differences in demographics. But it's not always that way. And so that brings me to the other part of my point, what I wanted to say, and that is that, there is a certain disadvantage that we all face if we are a minority. And it's important to acknowledge that too, because if you're of a mind that there is no such thing as passive racism or sexism or prejudice on a basis of demographic differences, that's not true at all. Like the reality is, like for me, I just use myself as an example. I was born in Chicago and I'm half Japanese. And so I'm 5'2", and I really don't look the same as a 6 foot tall white guy. So there's a lot of situations where I wouldn't say anyone's trying to be a racist. It's not like people get up in the morning and say, well, let me see how I can be a racist. Let me see if I can be an ass. It's not like that. What it is, though, is that there's some things which would probably come easier for me if I was not in some way a minority in society, right? Like when you look up, like literally look up to most of the people you're around, it's kind of, in some cases, difficult. It's more difficult to have command presence. Like if you're 6'2" and you walk in a room, well, everyone potentially just acknowledges your presence by default. When you're 5'2", you walk in the room and people just don't necessarily pay attention in the same way, right? Like you have to project in a different way in order to get the same result. Or people just subconsciously are inclined to be attracted and aligned more with people who they think are like them. And if you aren't really like everybody else, then even if folks aren't trying to exclude you or be in any way, the wrong kind of person, they still potentially on a subconscious level will alienate people who they don't see as being part of their club or clan. And that's something where, like, I would look at that and say, well, if I was born full-blooded Japanese in Japan, I would have had a different kind of a life, right? And if I wasn't mixed and I was, completely, just normal, I guess, white American, like not that Americans are all any one particular race, but, whatever the predominant mix of various white races were, like I might have had an easier time in some cases because I wouldn't be viewed as a little bit different in some ways, right? Same thing with people who are gay or queer or some sort of a different sexual orientation, right? Like you can say, well, no one's a homophobe or something, right? But then the reality is, if somebody is gay, and they're surrounded mostly by people who aren't, well, people will always see things that are different as something which is awkward and weird. And if people view a person as weird or as different, and then they have to kind of like work through that and then reach a point where they're willing to say, okay, well, I think this person is weird or different and I'm not comfortable with them, but because I need to be inclusive, I'm going to pretend that's not the case, and I'm going to treat this person with respect because I'm a good person and I treat people with respect. Well, that's fine. You treat them with respect, but do you actually respect them deep down inside, or are you kind of put off by them and then you're going to just pretend that you respect them, right? Or it could be sexism, where there's people who think women are not equal to men, and there will be men who have that attitude that I want to be inclusive and I want to be progressive, but at the same time I don't actually want to really give women quite the same chance as I would give a man, right? Like there is that it's a real thing. There are guys who don't want to take direction from women, and they would not necessarily be the kind of people who are extremely traditionalist or exactly trying to embrace perspectives that are not inclusive. They might have the right values on paper, but on a subconscious level, they still have a level of bias which influences their relationships. So I don't know if there's really anything to do about it, because I do think even if you are a person who wants to make changes, you can't really change the contents of a person's heart. Like you can make people change their behaviors on the front, but you can't really change their operating system on the back. You can make people be respectful in terms of how they act, but you can't make people subconsciously respect people who they see as different or other. It's like politics is another one of those things. You could make people agree to be respectful to people who are different than them on political matters, but then at the same time, you can't force people to actually see their political rivals as being equally valid. So even if people act outwardly respectful, they are not inwardly equitable. And that's something that's a challenge the more different you feel you are. And it might even be something that's not genetics or orientation or gender or anything like that. It might even just be that you look at the world through a different lens. Like, for example, I don't drink alcohol, and I'm not saying that no one should or anything like that. I'm just saying I don't. And so having the culture of going and hanging out at bars, it's really just not my thing. I don't want to do it, and I don't really have a lot of respect for that kind of a lifestyle. And so it's certainly a possibility that I would be treated and viewed as kind of an outsider by people who do have that culture and that way of living. And it doesn't matter whether I try to be accepting of those people, as long as I'm not a person who has that lifestyle, I'm still going to be viewed as other or as different. Or it could be that I'm not a religious person, and then all of the people who are religious, well, once they find out that, I don't believe what they believe, then suddenly, again, I'm other, I am different, I am a person who is ultimately of a lower caliber and class than those who feel that they are enlightened and they believe the correct thing. So it's very difficult when you live in a world where people don't have an attitude of respect and love for things that are different. And really people have that fundamental belief that if people are different than me, they are kind of a problem. And even if I have to treat them as equals, I don't really see them as equal in position to me, deep down inside. That's hard. And maybe I'm just talking about it to kind of validate the fact that it's a real thing, right? Like, it is true that people are marginalized in many ways for different things. It could be marginalized for orientation or race or gender. It could be marginalized on a basis of religious views or the absence of religious views, or lifestyle choices. It could even be something as simple as you decide you're not going to be a meat eater, and so you don't eat meat, and now suddenly people are going to judge you and they're going to treat you different because, if you don't want to order a steak at a restaurant, then they don't really want anything to do with you because you're a weak person and they are a carnivore or something like that, right? Like, there's always something that will make people treat other people as different, and it's not fair, it's not right, and it is something that's real. So I think it's important to acknowledge that there's such a thing as subconscious bias, and it's absolutely possible that you can do nothing wrong and you can still marginalize someone. You can make you can do no actual evil, and you can still fall far from doing good. And that's why it's important for us to self-appraise ourselves, to really ask the question, am I living a life which is honoring other people, or am I living a life which looks good on paper, but the contents of my heart are not really all that honorable? And if that's the case, then we should be willing to change ourselves, right? Because even if you are in some cases marginalized, the truth is we all have in one way or another, at some point in our lives, we have marginalized someone else on a basis of the belief that we've got it together and they don't belong to our tribe. And that's an attitude we should always shut down. And we should also be willing to advocate for others. Always stick up for the people who are the minority. Stick up for people who feel like they are not heard or valued, because the truth is, if you don't stick up for the little guy, if you don't stick up for the people who you see being marginalized, because you don't think that you're part of that group, sooner or later, in one way or another, potentially you will be part of a marginalized group. And if you spent your life turning blind eye to people when they are marginalized, then you can't really expect other people to advocate for you if the time ever comes when you are. So we should always practice empathy and respect and try to be as inclusive as possible. As for when it happens to us, well, I guess I would just say boundaries, right? Don't be a person who allows yourself to be marginalized and treated poorly just because you're different. Because the truth is, there are a lot of people in the world who will not treat you in a negative way. They will not treat you as less than. They will not make the differences that divide you a cause for not having fellowship with one another. They will genuinely find it in themselves to love one another and live that way in their dealings with their fellow human being. So surround yourself with people who actually make you feel seen and valued and heard and understood, because if you feel like you're not valued and understood, even if no one's trying to do wrong, the truth is you're not going to have good results in your life by surrounding yourself with people who make you feel awful about your life. But then my final thing is maybe find your tribe, right? Because the truth of the matter is that as much as we want to say that everyone should figure out how to get along and everyone should equally respect each other, the truth of the matter is the best way to find kindred spirits is to stop asking people who aren't kindred spirits to fit into the mold you want them to fit into. Instead of doing that, look for people who actually are like you, people who do share your values. It's kind of like if I don't go to the bar and I don't want to drink and I don't want to do that, but then I go hang out with people who are always going to the bar on Friday night. Well, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be inclusive of my way of life, but if they want to go to the bar all the time and get drunk and I really don't want to, or, you know, maybe it's something else, like maybe they love sports and I don't love sports. Well, there's that situation where I could continually say, well, why do they not accept me for who I am? Or I could say, why am I continuing to surround myself with people who are so different in their interests and their values and their perspectives, right? Like if you're gay and you always surround yourself with people who are straight, well then, you know, like, I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that there's not commonality there, but maybe, you know, maybe you'd have a more inclusive and accepting experience if you actually surrounded yourself with other people who are more like you. You know, same thing with anything else, politics or religion or the absence of religion. If I'm a stoic or a Taoist or something of that nature, if I'm not a religious person and then I choose to, you know, go to church on Sunday and hang out with all the Christian folks, and then I get frustrated when they find out I'm not a Christian and then they judge me for it. Well, I mean, yeah, I'm not saying it's not valid. Sure, it's valid. But then at the same time, isn't there a way for me to find people who do share my values and then not be unequally yoked with, if you will, unbelievers, right? Like that goes both ways. Christians that are paired up with people who don't believe in their faith, or maybe even unreligious people who are paired up with people who are deeply religious. It's best to find a way to actually just accept the fact people are different, and sometimes it's best to be separate, and then respect people, but respect them from a respectful distance. Like people who don't value you or people who don't respect you, don't try to make them respect you. Just stop trying to make them part of your life. Like, it's just that simple, you know? And I think if we have good boundaries in our life, it helps a lot with that, because then you can really kind of start to say, you know what, I'm going to make room for everybody in my life. But if somebody doesn't value having me in their life, then I'm just going to move on. I'm not going to keep on circling back and hoping that maybe if I do things differently, I'm going to be seen or valued or treated the way I want to be treated, even though, like, I've never been treated the way I wanted to be treated. You know, that's a thing where it's kind of like you make your bed in hell and then you wonder why you're burning. It's that we need to just look for things that work well in our life. Look for things that bear good fruit. Look for relationships which actually add peace into our life. Look for people who don't, you know, hate us under their breath and then find a way to accept us to our face when they have to. Look for people who actually truly want to accept us for who we are in a seamless and frictionless kind of a way. Because you can't change the world necessarily. You can definitely change your world, though, and that's why I think changes of scenery can be so important, because you can walk away from the people who maybe are well-intentioned, but they're also very limiting. They're the kind of people who will say, I respect you, but I just don't believe that you could actually do any of the things that I do. I don't believe that you have the same talent or capacity as me. I don't believe in, you know, in any way that I can trust you with anything, and yet I do respect you as a person. Well, if you respect me as an equal, but you don't believe that I can do anything equivalent to what you can do, then it's kind of hard for me to truly believe you respect me as an individual, right? And so the more we can limit the exposure we have to that kind of attitude and spirit, and leave behind the things that don't add positive value spiritually to our life, that works out best. And then just ask yourself the question, if you've ever been frustrated about feeling marginalized in any way whatsoever, have you ever marginalized someone else? And I think anytime we judge someone and we fall prey to that temptation to cast the speck out of our brother's eye when we have a log stuck in our own, then we all are guilty of it to some degree. And many things in life, that's the best thing you can do. If you're frustrated about how other people treat you and you feel like you are despitefully used, don't hate other people for it. Rather ask yourself while you look in the mirror and say, am I guilty of this thing that frustrates me so much when someone else does it to me? And if the answer is yes, I know I've been guilty of this in some cases, in some ways, then start working on that, because you know how it feels to be treated in a way that doesn't feel respectful. So don't treat other people in a way that is disrespectful. Don't be passive aggressive. Don't do things that appear to be friendly, but you're really actually just making things all about yourself, or you're putting someone else down and making yourself look better. Let go of all of those things, because it comes down to practicing love. If you love others, you're going to make the right choices. If you live a life where you're always seeking relationships that add love into your life and looking for ways to love others unconditionally without any prerequisites or expectations, then you're going to probably make the right choices. You're going to probably wind up going the right places. You're probably going to drift in the right direction. It's when we choose to prioritize something other than love when we go wrong. And there is a quote in The Crown TV show I've been watching where someone says that you can normalize madness so much to the point where it starts to feel like there's nothing wrong with it. And that's true. In our lives, sometimes we fail to set boundaries, and then we also fail to have the right level of introspection. We don't criticize ourselves when we're out of line and when we treat each other disrespectfully. We don't see it. And then at the same time, when we are disrespectfully treated by others, we don't necessarily create boundaries because we assume that, it's just an imperfect world, and so we have to take it as is. And neither of those are really right. It's important to set boundaries, and it's also important to be advocates for inclusion and a true spirit of magnanimity with other people, to be kind and to want what's best for others, and to see others as equals rather than as a commodity to control, or different people as something to be excluded. And it's okay to be different as long as you practice love toward others. That's the problem. When people don't practice love toward others, that's when we should react with clear boundaries that will help us to safeguard ourselves from their passive toxicity. I think the final thing I would mention is just that if you feel like you are not treated very well, the probability is that you aren't. And sometimes we can also let people gaslight us, and we can say, well, it was all in my head and I wasn't really treated poorly. I just made it up that I wasn't treated very well, and that's all my fault. Well, sure, it's possible. Sometimes we create a narrative in our minds and it doesn't align fully with the truth. But the reality is, usually, if you don't feel loved and you don't feel seen and valued and respected, then the probability is it's just exactly what it appears, and you're not really actually valued or respected. And so you do have to trust your gut on that. And if it feels like something is wrong, it probably is So be careful about letting people gaslight you into thinking that even though you feel awful about a place where you are or about people who are in your life, that you don't really have the license to feel that way, or you're a bad person for feeling that way. We should always surround ourselves with people who are radiating light into our lives, not people who make it feel like there's a dark cloud that just follows us everywhere and suffocates. Surround yourself with things that bring joy and a sense of virtue and hope and warmth into your life. Always good luck on your adventure, and no matter what you face, remember, you aren't alone, because there's always other people who are facing similar challenges and similar feelings. Even if you do feel a little bit alone, you really are not. Till next time, good luck on your journey. Always.